Hello, my name's Chris Beaumont. I'm one of the partners at Clive Owen LLP, and for the last 10 years I've been helping write the Academies benchmarking report. So what is the Academies benchmarking report? It's a review of the financial health of the academy sector. Education as a whole accounts for about 12% of the public spending, and academies account for a significant proportion of that. So what we're looking at within the Academy benchmarking report is those clients that Kreston members have actually undertaken audits of for the year ended 31st of August 2021. And as you can see on the screen there, we're talking about sort of 300 plus trusts, nearly 1,500 schools out of nationally sort of 2,500 trusts or 9,600 schools. So it's between 12 and 15% of the population, whichever way you look at it, which is a good sample. The main thing which has come out of the report this year is the increase in reserves, particularly in secondaries and multi-academy trusts. In 2020, the reserves were the highest they've been for, well, since we've started writing the report. So 2021 marks yet another sort of high. As you can see on here, secondaries have moved from 147,000 surplus to 155 on average, and multi-academy trusts have moved from sort of 221,000 surplus to 467,000 surplus. So significant movements in a positive direction. Primaries, they've actually, after having an increase last year of 25,000, the increase this year is 14,000, so not so marked, but we'll come on to the reasons for that in a minute. So what are the reasons for the increase in the reserves? Well, in part, it was the late notification of the additional COVID monies that came through, so things like the testing monies, the recovery monies. So they came through very, very late, so Academy Trust didn't have the opportunity to spend the monies that had come through to sort of help with that recovery. But on the other side, there were cost savings around supply staff, education resources, exam fees for secondary schools, especially sort of rebates coming through, utilities for the classrooms not being used as much, and maintenance costs being deferred. As one would expect, a lot of schools put off expenditure given the sort of uncertainty that existed at the time. And those cost savings in the main have offset the reduction in other income that a lot of academy trusts saw. And you can see that on this slide here, where the average total income per pupil in primary schools is up, multi-academy trusts is up, but secondary schools is slightly down, which possibly reflects the loss of sort of those trading incomes from the lettings being slightly down, not being totally offset by the recovery monies coming in. And then teaching costs, this sort of really backs up the story around the reduction in sort of supply costs. And what you can see here is sort of secondary, the average cost of teaching reduced from £2,500 to £2,446, and in multi-academy trusts reduced from £2,354 to £2,173. So those are fairly significant reductions. What you can see in the primary schools is a slight movement up, and that probably reflects the fact that primary schools were open for longer periods during the year to 31st of August 21 than they were historically, and also the inability to sort of cover that off with supply costs. What we did find when we were looking across the average teaching costs for all trusts and all types of schools was that the average came out at 75.3%, which is 0.1% up. ASCL and the government tend to recognise a sort of 78% number, so it's obvious that a lot of our schools are actually working at significantly below that sort of benchmarking which ASCL and the government recognise, hence the surpluses being achieved. And here you can see the average free reserves and the average sort of cash balances. Not unexpectedly, the cash balances are significantly higher than reserves, and we stay on a yearly basis that the cash balance will be more than the reserves just by the very nature of the sort of timing. Things like sort of the payment of PAYE, national insurance, local government pension scheme, teachers pension scheme, plus the fact that capital monies have been notified exceptionally late during the last couple of years, and therefore those balances are being held, but that's not the same as reserves. So whenever someone is looking at cash balances, just remind them that they should be looking at reserves. But as you can see here, those reserve numbers again have continued to increase, and those are all sort of fairly significant increases. On the other side, unfortunately, there are some trusts in deficit, but the percentage of those in deficit has been reducing. Was 8.2% a couple of years ago, it's now 3.8%, so a significant change there. And what comes out is that the percentage of trusts that actually spend more than 85% on teaching, usually the ones that are in deficit, about 2/3 of the ones that are in deficit. One of the things we did in preparation for writing this report is that we sent a survey around to our clients asking about predicted reserves over the next sort of 3 years. And what we've actually learned from this is that the smaller trusts are expecting the reserves to decline, whereas the larger trusts, some of them are actually expecting those numbers to be higher. This is unusual because if you go back a number of years, over the last probably 7 or 8 years, well, even sort of 12 years I've been working with Academy Trusts, most years when we've been looking at the sort of 3 years results going forward, or predictions, by year 3, the trusts have been in sort of deficit situations. So it's actually encouraging to actually see now trusts actually predicting the fact that they will have reserves of similar or increased after a period of time. And that's especially sort of good news given the sort of the challenges which are coming through for the sector. So we've got the Health and Social Care Levy coming through in April, which has recently been reaffirmed by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. So that'll be an increase in the national insurance with the way that that'll be taken. There's still this talk about increasing teachers' pay with the introduction of the £30,000 salary, although that seems to have been delayed slightly. We've got potential increases in employers' pension contributions. The LGPS review will be taking place next year with a potential increase thereafter. The Teachers' Pension Scheme review was due to take place this year, but that will not actually impact on Academy Trusts until 2024. So again, both of those could have significant impacts on the trust reserves going forward. There's also this issue of the replacement of these free ICT devices. There are obviously a number of computers been provided to schools over the last year. And the issue now is going to be, in 3 or 4 years' time, do you replace those devices? Do you actually make them sort of dormant devices? How do you actually sort of make them actually work for you going forward? And where do you get the money from to replace them? Because people have got used to having those ICT devices. It was interesting to note, and again, as part of this preparation for this survey, we actually asked clients about which budgets they'd be likely to cut going forward if they needed to, and the ICT budget was the one that least likely to be cut. There's also sort of potential sort of need to catch up on future maintenance work. As I mentioned earlier, some maintenance has been put off, so there might well need to be a sort of an increase in sort of work to actually catch up with that, and I'll come on to that in a bit more in a minute. And we've also got the change to the pupil premium census date, which will have an impact on some clients, and they'll actually be detrimental to those trusts. And then inflation. What is inflation going to be? We've got economists at the moment talking about anything up to 7% during the course of the year. The spending review has talked about increases of 5%. So is 5% enough if we're going to have inflation of 7% going forward? So I said a minute ago to have a quick look at capital expenditure, and what you can see here is capital expenditure in 21 was significantly up on the prior year, and in fact 2020 showed a reduction. The reduction in 2020 arose because the CIF, the conditional allocation that's actually made to trusts, was actually postponed, so the announcement was late, therefore the trust didn't have as much time to prepare to actually get that work done in the summer of 2020. So that work is now being done over the sort of summer of 2021, although again the announcements for this year's CIFs was actually delayed, and therefore that will have an impact on future years. In preparation for this report, we went out and asked our clients what it would cost to actually repair their estate. As you can see from the slide, sort of only 10% said less than £50,000, 23% were between £50,000 and £500,000, but the vast majority, with 67%, were saying more than £500,000. Now, only a trust with significant monies coming in from things like schools conditional allocation would be able to sort of meet those liabilities. It's also worthwhile noting at this point that actually there was a conditional data allocation survey done between 2017 and 2019. There's now a new one which started last year and will be completed in 2026. And what this will actually help trusts with is highlighting issues which they will sort of need to sort of review and investigate. It'll give more information around sort of roof surveys by having aerial drones look at them. It'll look at, well, provide photographic evidence of the work that needs to be done and provide support for potential SIF bids. So it's exceptionally important that actually people work with the inspectors when they're doing that report to make sure they get the most information out of it, especially as it provides significant information which they can use. It also may feed into the school's rebuilding programme, the SRP, whereby over a period of 10 years, some 100 schools are going to be rebuilt. And there is a feeling that the DCC may actually feed into that. And then one thing which came in for the first time in 2020 was the carbon intensity ratio. And I've put on the screen the results from 95 trusts there. It'll be interesting to sort of see as the sector develops and actually as everybody understands the measurements in a little bit more detail, how these numbers change. But I thought it'd be worthwhile putting those on the screen in the first place so people can actually see them this year and get an idea about how their trust compares. And then lastly but not least, a couple of slides. I know you all like to know what the average head teacher's salaries are. So that's on that tab there. And then the next one, the school business manager's salaries, showing you how those have changed over the last few years, depending whether you're primary, secondary or multi-academy trust. And last but not least, if you'd like to get a hold of a copy of this benchmarking report, then please click onto our website and you can download it, or if you'd like a hard copy, then please request it from marketing@cliveowen.com. And if you have any other queries, please contact myself or Kevin Shotton, and we'll be only too pleased to help you. Thank you very much.